workshop. So firstly, my colleagues from the Soil Association, Kate Still and Colleen, just want to just do a really quick hi, who you are. And
Hi, I'm Kate.
Hi,
so
Kate.
I am hi. So I'm one of the farming advisors at the Soil Association. Also manage some of our farming programs, working a lot with our pasture-based farmers, really. So I'm just going to talk to you briefly about why it's important, which I shall do in a second.
Great, thanks, Kate. And Colleen, just a mini intro
Hi there.
from you.
Yeah, I am the Senior Farming Programmes Manager in Scotland. So we work on the ground quite a lot with all sorts of farmers, but we're doing a lot of work at the moment with grazing and mob grazing. So I'll be trying to tease out what information people gather at the moment and do a bit of sort of interactive chat further down the line.
Great, thanks, Colleen. And we've also got Anna here, who you will have heard from with information about today's workshop. So Anna will be looking after us in terms of, hopefully there'll be no technical problems, but just sort of keeping and monitoring on how the workshop's going. And you'll see that we are recording this workshop, so just so you're aware of that. Anna, do you just want to quickly say hi?
Hi, everyone. If you have any...
Oh, we've lost you.
Oh, there we go.
We lost you.
If you have any technical problems like the one that I just had, feel free to just shout directly or through the mic, and I'll make sure to help you.
Great. And if people want to use the chat, if they've got questions, then that's available throughout. And then my final introduction is to Ian, who's joining us today from Environment Systems, who's the lead for this project, Pastoral. Ian, do you just want to say a quick bit about you, Environment Systems, and also just to mention University of Edinburgh as well?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yep, great. So I'm Ian Cameron. I'm a principal consultant at Environment Systems. We are a data and consultancy company that offer solutions into environmental and agricultural sectors. We've been working in agriculture for the past 10 years or more, providing different remote sensing based solutions to the agricultural sector. So yeah, as Helen said, we're leading this project, and my role in the project is leading a lot of the technical development. There's also the University of Edinburgh, who aren't here today, but who are very closely engaged with the project as well. They're offering a lot of the modelling expertise and the kind of science that we're leveraging to deliver some new solutions into pasture to help you optimise and improve what's going on and what you can do in your farms. We'll talk more about that in a bit.
Great, thanks, Ian. So just as a quick recap, this was on the email and the booking form, but today's Insight workshop is for us to discuss current pasture monitoring methods, explore what priorities are for you on your farm in terms of the data and the metrics that you may use or are interested in seeing how they could help you with your decision making, and look also at what Pastoral might be able to deliver in terms of ideas for measuring environmental performance alongside biomass. We'll conclude today's workshop with an overview of what we've got planned for the Pastoral project and ways in which you and your farm business could get involved. It's a 2-year project. It's funded by Innovate UK as part of Defra's farming innovation funding. That's new funding for projects like this under the new agricultural transition. So the funding is focused on activity in England. Absolutely delighted that we've got farmers here in Wales and Scotland, and Pastoral is certainly designed to be available to all livestock farmers far and wide, but we do have a particular focus in England because the funding being from Defra. So in terms of very quickly about Pastoral, and Ian will get into more detail in the final session, but as you've heard, it is a partnership project. We're aiming to develop a digital solution that could provide farm businesses with weekly data and insights, both on current and future grass biomass, and also to help quantify carbon budgets. So that'll be really important as we look to achieve net zero. Specifically, Pastoral will use satellite data to help map and forecast at a field scale, but we're really interested in understanding what you need that to do for you in order to support your on-farm decision making in terms of stocking rates, how you budget your forage, looking at when to cut, and overall your future planning in terms of what's happening in your fields, how well are they performing with the particular pasture and diverse species that you may have there or be thinking about. So our general idea is that this would be weekly information, but it's a co-design platform. So actually, if you tell us that's not helpful and what would be more helpful, the whole point and what we're starting with today, with today's Insight workshop, is that we work with you as farmers in dairy, beef and lamb enterprises to look at what you actually need to increase and improve your productivity, and also look at how you can be more efficient. So there's lots of ways to get involved, and Ian will explain a little bit about that at the end. So that's a brief overview. I'm now going to hand over to Kate to just sort of set the scene, really, isn't it, Kate? Thank you.
I am, yes. Just a very brief scene setting, just in terms of looking at pastoral optimization and pasture performance, and what the focus is. So if you can move me on. So yeah, in terms of sort of the direction of travel, particularly in ruminant livestock production, obviously maximising production from forage and from pasture really is the most sort of economically efficient direction of travel, but also from a sustainability climate change point of view is the direction of travel that we want to be going in. But obviously when you're focusing on growth rates from forage, when you're focusing on overall production from forage, you need to be also thinking about other aspects in terms of how we're going to be able to reduce nitrogen inputs in order to optimize the productivity of our ground. But also we're really starting to rely on pasture in order to store carbon in the soil, and how we're able to optimize pasture performance and the way we're grazing and managing our grasslands in order to increase their opportunity as a carbon sink. So there's a balance between productivity, maximizing it as a feedstuff, but then also as a carbon store, and also equally delivering for biodiversity, how we can get that out of our pasture too. And so we need to be thinking about efficiency, but then we need to be thinking about animal welfare and animal health. But then we also need to be thinking about these other aspects in terms of carbon stores, biodiversity, all of the other flood defences, all the other important aspects that grasslands can have. So if you can move me on, because I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of pasture optimization and what sort of priorities I would say at the moment. Obviously, I'll give you an opportunity for all of you to say that I'm wrong and what is important to you. But in terms of the way people are moving in terms of grazing livestock, the focus is on rotational systems, whether you want to call it cell grazing or mob grazing or long grass grazing or however strip grazing. This idea that you are having high stocking rates on small areas of land makes it incredibly important for you to then estimate what forage you've got available for that stock so that you can manage that effectively. And so I imagine one of the priorities in terms of how people are monitoring and estimating the availability of dry matter in terms of their pasture is becoming more and more important as they're trying to maximize what production they can get out of those areas, and particularly as well as the animals coming in to what kind of covers that you're expecting in terms of kilograms dry matter, but then more importantly, when you're taking the animals off, what kind of residuals that you're leaving behind, particularly in relation to the benefits that these may be having to the soil. So in terms of making these estimates as we move towards this far more managed rotational system, I think is just becoming more and more important. If you move me on one, yeah, So these were just some examples I stole from one of the projects down at Northwick on their cell grazing project, in terms of the different types of rotational grazing systems that people are becoming more and more adapted to, particularly as they are starting to demonstrate that you can get incredibly good growth rates using these sorts of rotational systems, but also incredibly good growth rates on a much smaller area. You're able to really maximize productivity on a smaller area, which is going to be even more important as we look to massively reduce the amount of nitrogen that we're applying to our grasslands. So these need to be able to sustain maximum production without nitrogen use. So obviously maximizing legumes and other nitrogen fixing plants, which then sort of leads me on to my next slide. Sorry, I need to race through, but I want to hear from you. So something that I'm incredibly interested in, and something that we've been doing a lot of work with the Soil Association, is the use of herbal lays and diverse swards. And so one of the challenges with measuring the quantities of dry matter available forage with these sorts of swards is because you've got such a diversity of plant and leaf size, being able to actually estimate that using a plate meter is quite challenging. So something that I'm particularly interested in is what the opportunities could be with these new systems, with these satellite systems, around estimating more accurately estimating available forage using diverse lays, and particularly in terms of how they the availability of the forage across at a field scale. So obviously you can go in and do your plate metering, but in order to really pick up how the production of these swards is across the whole field, in order to do those estimates more accurately, I think is really key, because they can tend to be quite patchy, variable in terms of how much forage is available. So how we can use potentially new measuring and monitoring tools to estimate availability of herbal lays, I think is going to be a real priority in terms of optimizing pasture. And then lastly, my last slide was around just going back to the economics of it. So, you know, we're seeing the trends continually going forward in terms of farmers looking to maximize milk from forage and overall livestock live weight gain from forage, largely because of the ever increasing concentrate feed costs are just making it more and more economic to do it that way. But on the other side of that, we also need to be making sure that our pastures are really working hard for us, particularly if we are used to seeing, you know, diverse sward seeds, herbal lay seed mixes, which are more expensive. We want to be able to make sure that those pastures will perform for as long as we can make them, in terms of, you know, reducing costs of reseed, and also reducing the impact of having to do another round of cultivations to re-establish another sward. So in terms of utilizing tools going forward to maximize the pasture for your livestock, but also maximizing how long you can get those pastures perform, which comes back to our rotational grazing system. So those are the things that I was just sort of thinking about in terms of optimizing pasture. It's those sort of rotational aspects, and then also what can we do with herbal lays, measuring herbal lays, and if this can help, but then also going back to the economics and how we can, you know, obviously maximize performance, but also increase longevity of those lays. And I've conscious I've only got about 5 or 10 minutes now, but I just wanted to hear from you, or in terms of why pasture optimization is important to you, and particularly looking under the headings of sort of productivity, financial and environmental. So environmental sort of, you know, being a soils and biodiversity bit, the financial element, and then the productivity element from both, I guess, livestock performance point of view, but also then productivity in terms of the life of that sward. If people wanted to put their hand up or write anything in the chat to give me any of your thoughts on what's sort of, you know, what's really important to you in terms of pasture optimization, let's have a little conversation. And I'll shush. we got any hands up, or anyone got anything to add to the chat in terms of sort of what's most important? Is it being able to... Okay, brilliant. So Sue's about reducing nutrient losses to the environment. Yep, absolutely. So looking to reduce those artificial inputs.
I see Stephen there.
Sorry, Steve. Oh, I don't think I can hear you.
Hi.
Hi there, Steve. What are your thoughts in terms of...
It's yield really with us because, as we said the other day, we got an issue with drought, and we wondered whether these herbal lays might produce more dry matter in drought conditions. They've certainly been equivalent to the ryegrass clover we have here in this year with all this rain we've had right throughout the summer. Dry matter is more difficult to assess. We certainly, when we cut them, we've got to leave them. We realised we've got to leave them 2 days instead of 1 to dry out. Although perhaps spreading it might help, because I think we get most dry matter lost within the first couple of hours of cutting. And then we've come on to this whole carbon story. So environmentally, we see them as an ethical approach. And lastly, we try and get all our milk from forage-based crops. We don't buy any grain cereals in to feed any of the livestock now. But it does mean it's a low-yielding system, so we've got to watch the economics of it a bit.
Sure, and I think that's it, isn't it? It's if we're looking to make the most out of pasture for production, that's brilliant, but it does then potentially have an impact on performance. So in terms of then how you get those benefits from biodiversity or from carbon and then other added benefits, I think that's where we have to focus our attention as well.
But if we milk once a day, Kate, which we've done for the last 8 years, I think, we can't really expect cows to hold more milk.
No, sure. Yeah.
If we milk twice a day, we might get another 15-20% more milk, but there's big costs associated with that. And yeah, we've got plenty on the farm with the beef production and the yogurt. So yeah.
There's plenty of other aspects. Thank you. That's great. So
You're muted.
Sorry. So yeah, about diverse swards to replace frequently cultivated land to short-term lays, and I think that again we were discussing this at a group that we had last week around sort of the longevity of some of these diverse swards or swards in general, so that we're not then having to cultivate and plough up and release any kind of carbons back into the soil. How can we make them last longer? And I think being able to manage them very, very effectively is the key, and and rotational grazing is part of that. Starting with the soil, improving soil health. Yep, absolutely. In terms of no use of fertilizers or sprays. Brilliant. Okay. Well, that's great. I mean, I think we're all on the same page, really, in terms of, other important aspects that we want in terms of productivity, but then, soil health and biodiversity, but then also being able to reduce inputs. So that's really helpful. But I think the important thing now is really, from your point of view, to look at the data aspect and what you're doing at the moment in terms of the sorts of data you're collecting on grass production and how you're utilizing that. So I think if I pass on to Colleen now, and we can get into a bit more to the data.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Very helpfully, Anna is sharing the slides again onto the next one. So I don't know, we can leave this slide up or just put it back to the faces perhaps, because I think we can do this bit as a sort of bit of a chat and you know, a bit of a conversation, and use the chat function as well for comments. But from our sort of point of view, knowing where technology can sort of add to what people are already doing or make life easier in terms of sort of decision making, it would be really useful to know firstly what sort of data people currently collect, or what do you monitor, and actually before that I should ask what types of farms do people have who are in the audience. So are there any dairy or beef or sheep grazers or people with a mix? I think that would be useful if you pop that in the chat, if you're a dairy, beef or sheep farmer, just to kind of get a sense of what sort of systems people have. And then also a question for the audience, are there any people currently doing mob grazing or rotational grazing? Would be quite useful to just get a sense of what people are doing. And actually, if I do request control and I can share a little picture that Anna sent me. So the other thing that I was going to ask people was, where are you based in the country? But Anna very helpfully made a little map already, if I can find it. Of course, now I can't find it. But it looks like we have a good spread. Oh, here we go. All right, I don't know if people can see that or not, but we've got a good cohort of people in Wales and quite a spread across England, and a few from Scotland. I think since we made that map, there's maybe another couple in Scotland, but that's quite a nice spread of people that we've got there. So yeah, I'm quite interested to see if there are any people already doing rotational or mob grazing, and also what sorts of farms you've got. And I see we've got an ecologist as well, sheep and grass systems. So I think having a look at the sort of attendee list as well, there was quite a few folk that maybe knew did grass. But yeah, really interested to hear if people want to either put their hand up. So at the top of your window, if you haven't used Teams before, there's a few little icons, and one of them has a little face with a hand up, and there you can either raise your hand or you can put something in the chat function for just letting us know what kind of data, if any, you currently collect. Are there people using plate meters, for example? Do you find those useful? So somebody in Northern Ireland, herbal lays and mob grazing for a few years, looking at species diversity. So that's a theme that keeps coming up. And so I think that's something that's sort of quite difficult to get a handle on at the moment, to put figures to what sort of biomass you've got in a really a diverse lay. Dairy and forage. So yeah, we've got a bit of a mixture of people. And then the other question as well is what sort of information you currently use or collect, or data that you collect. What does it tell you? What do you collect information for? Are you doing any measurements, or do you think doing measurements would help you with your decision making? So yeah, we've got a couple of mob grazers, people trying mob grazing, not using plate meter, but just going on what's there. So yeah, I think I get the sense that quite a lot of people may or may not find it useful to sort of collect data, but a lot of folks sort of using gut, or just kind of looking and observation and sort of working it out based on your experience as well. So that looks like something that quite a lot of people do. An organic micro dairy, an organic beef and lamb, mob graze but badly. So Nick Miller, if you want to put your mic on, how do you think it's badly mob grazed, or what might make it easier? Looking at switching to a more planned and monitored system, and switching to mob grazing for beef and lamb as well, but I haven't been doing much monitoring. Yeah, so quite a few folks saying thinking about doing monitoring but not got round to it yet. So this is maybe a good opportunity to get involved with you know, this project. We're sort of looking at what you would monitor, why you would monitor it, how it can help your decision making. And then the other question is how much does that information matter to you? So in terms of your sort of mob grazing or your decision making, if you had data that was sort of collected without taking up lots of your time, that you just got a sort of weekly something in your inbox or something that's in a piece of software or an app perhaps, how much would that influence your decision making? Ben James alert to eyeball grass when you worked in Springblock Dairy, recording it all and put into AgriNet to make the grazing decisions. So yeah, actually that's another question that we didn't have sort of on the slide, but what kind of tools are people using at the moment as well? So it might be useful, Anna, to pop the slide back up just now, just so that folk can sort of read the 3 questions and answer one or all of them. But yeah, if you're using software or tools already, what tools do you use and do you find them useful? What kind of information do you not get from them that other things might be able to address? And baselining. So Megan Rogers, collecting baseline measurements fortnightly using a plate meter, but often using eye, watching how the animals are performing and what condition the pasture is in. So Megan Rogers, I don't know if you can unmute your mic or if Anna can unmute the mic, just for a bit of chat. And if people want to sort of chip into conversation, you can use the hand up function as well. But how you find sort of observation as an important part of your decision making, and whether something on top of that would be useful.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's actually Peter. I'm on my partner's laptop.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we use the plate meter just as sort of just to compare what we are growing in different parts of the farm, sort of all internally, and then yeah, we just really look at how the animals are performing. So like with the cattle, often they let you know when they want to move.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just kind of, you get your eye on over time, you see how the animals are looking. Are they are they going into the right are they going into the right cover? Is the grass too low? Is it too high? Are they leaving a good residual behind? So it's taken a few years to get to that point. We were using the plate meter every week, and to be honest, kind of went a bit away from that because we thought it was doing a bit too much, and we weren't really getting that much out of it. So drop that down to fortnightly, and that's more, to be honest, just to get around the farm, have a walk around the field, see what's going on, because it's amazing how much it changes within a fortnight. And then, but when we go out to the different mobs of animals, obviously that's when you're looking ahead and looking at where they've been and what they're doing at the time. And yeah, so like with the plate meter, we do diverse like herbal lays, swords, so it's not an entirely accurate measurement using the plate meter. But for us, it's because we're just comparing to ourselves, that doesn't really matter, I don't think, because it's just giving us a baseline value. And actually often you find out that the animals get through the pasture quicker, or they're not as quick as what you'd expect. So it depends on the time of year, or the weather conditions, all those, all sorts of factors.
Yeah, it sort of varies.
A lot of it is experience and just learning from your mistakes and just having a look and using your own stockmanship at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. Does anybody else want to chip in verbally or put their hand up on either what you sort of currently monitor or look at, or what sort of information you use to help you make your decisions? And there's quite a lot of comments coming in, so that's quite useful. Oh, I've lost the one about how accurate is a plate meter when grazing forage is at waist height. And milk recording. Yeah, so and Helen saying, interested to hear if anyone's regularly comparing their performances with others. Is there anyone looking at, I don't know if you're in a sort of grazing groups or working groups or discussion groups, is anybody doing that, comparing your sort of baselines with what other folk are doing, or would that be useful? But I think from the chat there's quite a good sense there. I just still have not got the hang of being able to sort of talk and read things at the same time. But yeah, I think we're getting a good kind of sense through the chat of what people are doing. Organic upland beef and sheep farm, mob grazing, ewes, paddock grazing, young cattle. So I'm not picking out any. Is there any folk currently using sort of software or digital monitoring, or is that something that would be useful for folk? Stephen Turner, we've been a member of the Coast to Coast group, mostly organic. Yeah, so that's really useful. Helen's asking, where is the group, the Coast to Coast group? So I think we've got quite a good idea of some of those questions. I think there's quite a mix of people, Somerset and Devon, there we go. There's quite a mix of people in the call, different farming types, different sort of grazing systems, different levels of what you're sort of collecting and how often you're using it. And yeah, it would be useful to be able to compare with people doing similar operations on similar soils. So yeah, that's something that keeps coming up, as well as the sort of difference in soil type and sward type, as to what your sort of measurements and decision making might look like. So I think that's given us a sort of good overview. I don't know, Kate, if you want to add anything or ask anything over what we've seen in the chat there, or if we then move on to Ian.
It looks like Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned, is it possible to use a fake meter on waist high forage lays? It certainly isn't. So you know, the big calf we have to judge by eye, and then what's left. The dairy cows tend to eat eat much more of the herbal lays, and gradually getting more predominance of grass, I would say, in those lays under that type of grazing pressure. So it's easier, but you have to take it a bit with a pinch of salt. I think it's a guide. It's not quite as accurate as just measuring ryegrass and clover.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see whether we can, you know, what the scope is within this project to be able to do an element of kind of calibration with plate metering, as well as actual kind of cutting and weighing total forage dry matter, to, you know, see how they do compare, and perhaps use it as an opportunity to look a little bit about, you know, how you can do more accurate estimates. But I think, as someone else mentioned, it comes down to you know, you do it by eye to a bit, and you see what they've eaten, and if they've eaten it, or you need to give them a bit more. And so there's an element of continual adjustment, isn't there? Yeah.
Monitoring rumen fills really important. Well, certainly on a dairy basis, and we we keep a real close eye on that. No point keeping dairy cows hungry if you're on a completely forage-based system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Helen, did you have something?
Yeah, it was just, I suppose, an observation and possibly a query for Ian, because it's sort of the information that everyone's kindly shared. I suppose it's just sort of thinking about, oh, sorry, I'm trying to lower my hand. Yeah, just thinking about if people aren't necessarily routinely monitoring, or it's a bit more ad hoc and reliant just on what they're seeing and walking the field. I suppose just for us to take that into consideration, that we haven't necessarily got at all a standard approach, which is absolutely cool and fine, but just thinking about how we manage that, we can learn along together, I suppose, of what's helpful. And certainly thinking of projects that Kate's been involved with, perhaps with the Fab Farmers work, looking at where we've been working with groups of farmers who are sharing information more frequently between each other. So it was just sort of more something to think about, how much monitoring is necessary, beneficial, and what's the best way to approach it.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think you answered the question you were putting to me.
I would say that we thought about this plate meter business, and we wonder about actually weighing square meters. You know, just chucking a square meter quoit almost field and then cutting that and weighing that. You know, just done that with our turnip crops, well, kale, sort of winter crops. It's amazing how little dry matter intake they're getting from what we've been given, and so, you know, and why they're eating so much silage. It's just so that we haven't done that up to now, and there's quite a significant labour input into that. But I will try and do that next year, because I really want to get a real handle on what these pastures are producing. And you know, I've got a computer diet program called Diet Check, and I can put it into that and might get a shock. I don't know, but we did monitor calf growth rates this year using weigh bounder, unfortunately, rather, which is pretty inaccurate compared to a weigher. But our weigher is broken, so we've got to get another one. And they did grow at target growth rates for Jersey cross Guernseys. That's on a mob grazing system.
Great, thank you, Steve. Ian, you got your hand up again? Do you want to come back in?
Yeah,
we can just sort of continue into your part now as well.
Sure. I just want to kind of make a note that this concept of calibration and validation of what's going on the ground currently is definitely something we're wanting to address within Pastoral, and we will be looking for farmers to kind of engage on that. I'll come to that later on, but it's definitely within the scope of the project. We can't do it on every farm that we're looking at, but we are looking to target some, and also have some resource available from project staff to actually go out and help coordinate some of that activity as well, so that it's not all on the farmer. I'll come to that later, but I just want to put stick a note in that's something we want to do, and people that are interested in that, we're really keen to engage and kind of pick up. And Edinburgh University particularly are also very keen on that, because that calibration and validation of what's going on is so important to build understanding and build trust.
Yeah, we'll be really interested in that.
Cool. Well, we'll make sure that we get everybody's details that's interested, and we can go from there. And the other thing there is we are in the process of hiring a project officer whose role is going to be helping coordinate that kind of activity. Should be in place by the start of January, and we'll introduce them to people and then take it from there, really.
Great, thanks, Ian. So yeah, I think we've got a kind of good sense of what people are doing and not doing, and where you know, where extra data might be useful. So I think good timing to sort of pass on to you now, and Anna's got the slides up again, and hear about what you're developing through Pastoral.
Cool. So I'll try and keep it short as well, so we've got some time to talk and get some feedback and thoughts from people as well. So what is Pastoral? So it's a 2-year Innovate project. It's being funded by the UK Innovate programme. It's a partnership between 3 organisations. I'll talk about them in a sec, and stakeholders. But what it's trying to do is to combine satellite data with advanced algorithms to give you weekly intelligence on grass biomass and carbon through a co-designed platform. The objective of trying to increase farm productivity, carbon efficiency, and really just give you better insight into what's going on across your farmed area. Next slide, please. So, quick projects overview. As we've discussed, quality productive pasture is essential for livestock production. Currently, farmers are the standard way of doing things. If you are monitoring, although as we said, actually maybe we should say is possibly just a standard to be eyeballing it and using instinct as much as it is to be taking measurements, and that's something certainly we're interested in reflecting as well. But if you're taking measurements, the standard would probably be a plate meter to assess the amount of available biomass for grazing. But we would suggest that it doesn't necessarily reflect field quality or future growth under climate change, and that some of those challenges are in measuring and accurately understanding how much grass is available across a whole field from a few point measurements. It definitely limits the ability to do some pasture management decisions. So we'll be developing 2 services from this project. The first of this is a biomass monitoring service, which is using satellite data and a model, and I'll give you a bit more of an insight into that in a minute. to try and track and show what the current date-to-date biomass availability is within each field, so kilograms dry matter. There might also be potential for doing some short-term prediction as well, so you might be able to see what it's likely to be in a week or two's time. But at the minimum viable product here is something that tells you, as of this last satellite image and model run, this is what your distribution of biomass is across your different fields. Secondly, there's a carbon ready product we'll be developing. That could be producing carbon budget information, how much you have in your soil, how much you have in your above ground biomass. That could be on a weekly basis as well, but we're not yet sure where the market is going. Is weekly carbon information actually of use to farmers? Or is it more that it's a seasonal assessment or long-term assessments where we're showing you how your carbon budget has been performing over the year? On the basis of trying to help evidence how you're doing in terms of carbon storage and sequestration. And that really needs to develop in response to the ELM scheme and how farmers are operating in the carbon market. But there's a number of tools we can offer here. And over the project, we really want to understand how to help you make best use of the carbon data that can come out of the project. The services will be developed with the ability to be integrated into existing workflows. So we're not necessarily wanting to come up with yet another platform, yet another service. We really want to integrate it as simply as possible into what already exists. Or it could even be as simple as it's email updates that you get each week. We're very flexible how the service works, and that's really where the co-design is going to come in to make sure that data comes to you in the most useful way possible. And we're looking to be getting around about 100 livestock farmers across England, also Scotland and Wales. But again, this focus, unfortunately, well, this focus does have to be on England. We have to make sure that we get enough benefit into English farming under the requirements of the funding. And that engagement will be testing, development. Excuse me, my dogs have started coming to annoy me. Go away. Sorry about that. Across a really wide range of farming. Organic, regenerative, conventional. We really want to be getting as many different types of farming systems into the project so we can get as broad a benefit as possible. Next slide, please. So who's involved? Environment Systems, as said, we're leading the project. That means that we're also co-investing in the project. So we are putting our money where our mouth is effectively to make sure that the benefit is realised. We also have two very strong partners, Soil Association, who you all know, and Edinburgh University, who have a long lineage in developing models and using remote sensing and satellite imagery to deliver benefits to people. And also there's the Innovative Farmers Network under Soil Association, who are also engaged. We've got a number of stakeholders in the project as well from across farming, so Waitrose, dairy farmers, Dovecot, Dalehead, Mole Valley. These are all helping us understand, get better insight into the project, helping us steer it in the right direction, make sure that we're tapping into the right networks of farmers. So what is the science behind Pastoral? And the science really comes from some Edinburgh University models that have been developed over the last 15 years or so. What they've developed is fundamentally it's a carbon budget model where you track the amount of biomass that is available in vegetation, and you apportion it into foliage and stem, and then you know that there's an amount of biomass that's in the roots, and then you track that biomass over time as the biomass grows in response to weather and climate, and more sunlight you can track as it grows. Then you can track as livestock comes in and takes that biomass away, understanding whether it's been cut and harvested or whether it's been grazed, and effectively track the carbon through the system. So with just weather and knowing what the stocking density is in fields, they've demonstrated the ability to really just track and have a pretty good idea of how the biomass is moving and also how the carbon is moving through this system. You can also use remote sensing to estimate the foliage and stem components of live biomass, and that's really where this project comes together. Environment Systems is producing imagery to kind of keep a week-to-week observation of how much grass we can see in fields, what the what the above ground biomass is, and then the model is being used to bring it all together to say, well, this is how much dry matter there is for harvest, and this is how much carbon has been sequestered into the soil or removed through grazing or harvesting. You can see here on the right that the model basically predicts as the grass grows. You've got cutting events on the top, which are showing how much is being taken away, and how the leaf area index below, the amount of green vegetation, is tracking up and down. In summary, each field has a data set like this, which is tracking the grass as it's growing, being cut, converting that into biomass estimates and carbon. And you would be getting data like that on a week-by-week basis, at least, to monitor what's going on. I don't want to get too technical, but it's just to say that there's some really good, strong modelling here, some strong science, but it now needs to be really tested in the real world. Make sure that the data that we're producing is accurate, that it's suitable for your needs, and that we're getting it to you in a fashion that actually makes sense, and that then it's being tested in the real world context, so that you've got your observations, your instincts about the farming, about what you're seeing in the pastures. Also, any measurements you might be making through plate meter or grab samples, making sure that that data is accurate. So there's a calibration and validation component here that's really important, and then feeding that back into the model. So if we can adapt and adjust things for different, maybe we need to change some parameters for herbal lays versus more traditional ryegrass mixes. So to get that calibration validation to adjust things as we go. So what will the project deliver? Starting off with the farmer information, what we need from each farmer that wants to get engaged in the project is a map of their fields and the boundaries of the fields. So that's so that we can get satellite imagery to sample each field and monitor what's going on. We also need some management information, what your stocking system is, what sort of rotations you're doing, what sorts of cattle and you manage on these fields. But that information is quite lightweight. So we parameterize, we set up the system on that initial data set. Then it moves into the analysis where we've got constant satellite imagery, we've got the model, and we've got weather and climate data that's coming in and producing these biomass and carbon predictions. Related to that component, we've got this calibration and validation on selected farms that I've talked about. And we really want to talk to people about how you can get involved there and get as much varied calibration and validation data as we can. But for each week, there's going to be a biomass report, and that's going to be generated. And you can see here, it's going to potentially look like a kind of graph showing how the grass has changed week to week. There's also potential for a carbon budget report. Again, as I've said, we don't think that there's value in a week-by-week carbon budget, but please tell us if we're wrong. If you'd like to see that weekly, it can be generated on a weekly basis, but we suspect it's probably going to be more useful monthly, annual carbon information. And how we deliver that data is quite open. We certainly think at the very least emails, web apps are going to be part of the solution. We already have some solutions that we do where we're sending farmers week by week observations from satellite imagery of their fields, and those are sent out through email. So we have already the capability to do that. And we're so I'm just seeing a couple of comments there. Gareth, you are in Wales, that's fine. We can absolutely get you involved in the project. So although there has to be benefit to England, we absolutely can involve people from Wales and Scotland in the project. So don't feel if you're not in England, you can't get involved. So I just spotted that on the chat there. I thought I'd mention that quickly as well. Like I say, we're really wanting to make sure that the reports, how they look and how they're delivered is co-designed, that everybody in the project gets a chance to say how it should be to make sure it hits as many people in the right fashion. That doesn't mean that everybody gets to say, I want it this way and it will be that way. We're going to have to see what makes sense, what for what maximizes the benefit. But if it turns out there's like two streams of people, one that wants it as a web app and one that would much prefer an email, you know, that's the sort of thing that we can reflect. And the data that the project's going to be delivering will be early access, 2022 and 2023 seasons. You'll be getting access to the data if you get involved. So you'll be seeing some probably quite rough stuff very early on, and then it will refine over the project. And you can tell us how engaged you want to be. But basically, if you get engaged, you're going to have the opportunity to get this data back for your fields to test and trial. Next slide, please.
Oh, Ian, there's a quick comment from Sophie in the chat. I will move the slide along, but
that's fine. Yeah,
it would be good for you to answer that while I'm clicking a button.
Soil organic carbon. Yes, essentially that is the plan. Edinburgh University are more leading on how we're going to calibrate that, and we also have to be realistic about quite how much soil organic carbon we can measure. And I will admit straight away that I'm not an expert in soil organic carbon, so I will that's the sort of thing that I would expect university to help us understand. How the variation seen in the data is unlikely to be seen in less than 5 years, and this is a key question exactly. Which the soil organic carbon builds up slowly over time. How accurate is your baseline data set? I can't go into any more detail on that, but please stay engaged in the project. We'll have further workshops with Edinburgh University where we can take those questions to them and they can get back to you in more detail. Sorry if that's a bit of a cop-out, Sophie. Helen, do you have anything to add to that?
I really don't. Sorry, I'm not laughing at anything other than just the honesty there, Ian. And I think that's absolutely. This insight workshop is just the start, and certainly I'd recommend anyone who's interested, fascinated in what we're up to, keeping involved and coming on the journey with us. We need to find some of these answers together, and we certainly, yeah, it's the direction of travel that's important to be looking at.
Great, and thanks for the good questions. Keep them coming, please, and those that I can answer, I will. I'm a remote sensor, though not a soil organic carbon person. Just to get that out there. So, what's the flow of the project look like? At the moment, we've got basically 3 phases in the project: discovery, development, and rollout. We're currently in discovery, where we're trying to get as many people as possible into the project, really understand the differences in farmers that we have engaged, so that we can capture your needs, get the data set up, get your farms into the project, so that then from April, we're ready to start developing and testing and getting the data out to you. That development process is going to be iterative. We'll be taking satellite data, bringing together carbon biomass models, and then field calibration, so actively testing the data on farm and then iterating as things need to be improved or changed. So we've got a period of quite intense development of changing, responding to your needs. There will be the field labs and the workshops helping guide that, as well as direct data collection. But we have this quite intense period of development, change, iteration that then we lock down into rollout onto a delivery infrastructure. That basically means getting the delivery pipelines. We need to automate this approach and deliver the data on a weekly basis into farms. That then happens in January to September in 2023. So 2022 development, 2023 testing of the final product, and there's still going to be scope in there for iterating and changing, but it's probably going to be more focused on how the product looks rather than anything really detailed in terms of how the models are functioning. But there still will be calibration and validation activities happening in 2023. Next slide, please. So how are we engaging, or how would you like to engage with farmers? You can see this effectively as 3 different types of activities. First of all, we have engagement like this, where we're doing workshops and webinars and a farmer survey that's going to be sent out as widely as we can get. From that process, we're aiming to get 100 farms signed up for trials with some very simple onboarding. All of those farms need to get, as I say, the location and outlines of, we'd really like at least 5 fields per farm, so that we're getting a good variability across your farm. We basically just need to know where the field boundaries are and what's the management that you're doing on those fields to kind of be able to give you that data, get the data into the system and give you some benefit out. The next tier down, we'll be doing some selected field labs, so it's more intensive work, more regular engagement with the project with some field lab workshops. There we'll also be asking farmers to collect data on a more detailed basis, more like weekly. If you're already collecting, making your own plate measurements, plate meter measurements, you're making your own biomass measurements per week, and you're willing to share that with us, that's great. That's just the sort of thing we want in this kind of second tier, where we're getting much more detailed data week to week to kind of calibrate and validate. And then finally, we have a subset of farmers again who are really interested in doing some much more detailed measurements. So where, you know, we're taking out your plate meter, we're maybe doing some destructive sampling, doing some carbon measurements on the fields as well, to understand at quite a detailed level to what's happening. Edinburgh University have got some methodologies they're wanting to apply at that stage. And as I say, we'll be having our project officer coming out onto farms as well and collecting data, as well as measuring the biomass from a plate meter and by cut and weigh. There's also plans to use some other technologies for measuring the amount of green biomass. There's a thing called a leaf area index, measuring to a LICOR, I think it's called, where you basically stick it into the plant and it kind of measures the amount of light that's intercepted. And that's another good way of calibrating things. And as well as the farmers that have come in through the project, as we see, we could also be bringing in farms from outside the network as well. So Edinburgh University have some of their own calibration farms that they'll be using for that too. Considering measuring bricks next year, is this of use? Possibly. So that's carbohydrate content. I think that's a thing that we'd need to take back to Edinburgh to check with them whether bricks is of interest to the model. But if it's a good proxy for the amount of biomass, then bricks would definitely be of interest. But if it isn't a good proxy for biomass, then it might not be. But it's certainly something to raise and consider. Thanks, Gareth. So, yeah, so it may well be a pretty good proxy for what's going on. So like I say, so we've got these different tiers, and we've got a farm survey that's going out as well. Please sign up to that, put your information into that, tell us what you do. Anything to add about this, Helen, about how we're engaging?
No, I don't think so. We'll conclude the workshop with a recap of this, but I suppose the main thing is at the moment that we're here to get your thoughts and your insights. So feel free to get in touch with us after today's session as well, share with some things that are going on. I particularly noted both Stephen sharing about his Coast to Coast group that he's part of. We're very happy to, if you're in a discussion group, to come along and do a short presentation at a meeting virtually because of our friend COVID and just for efficiency. But happy to do that. And Anwen as well. Certainly Ian and Caron and others from Environment Systems are keen to engage with the likes of HCC as AHDB as well. So it's really useful to know about projects that we can link in with, and certainly working with partners such as Delhead and Dovecote. We know that there's a lot of sort of data and insight that we can get through supply chain reporting as well. And similarly, we could look at some of the dairy processors for that perhaps, but looking for recommendations from farmers in terms of who they know, as well as themselves, hopefully, for you who've joined us today, your interest in this topic and how you could see perhaps being involved. And as Ian's outlined, there's lots of different ways, quite light touch, follow us as we progress, or if you really want to get stuck in and be part of the team co-developing, then there's an opportunity to do that too.
Yeah, and the other thing to say as well, if there's interest in more workshops that focus in on the science and really look at what's going on and think about how to make best use of that. It's the sort of thing we'd be interested to hear, because we can absolutely get Edinburgh University to come along and really do some deep dives, and for those that are interested, help you understand how it works, and then how we could best make this thing work. So that's also something that if there is interest there, let us know, and we could absolutely look to some other workshops like that. Okay.
Cool.
Are there any questions about the project at the moment? Anything we can answer before we get on to the final bit? I'll give some time for hands or. Oh. Okay, well maybe we'll just. Oops. Can this link to no fence collars to automatically move stock? That's an interesting question. That might be a stretch goal.
That's taking all your technology.
That's an interesting.
level.
It is an interesting
Yeah,
thought, though, isn't it?
it is. Yeah, absolutely.
I think, though, Ian, it's important about that. We don't want Pastoral to be standalone, so it is about where it can integrate, but it indeed may not be in the 2 years. But it's good to have a wish list, isn't it?
It is actually, though, one of the real questions is how frequently people are changing paddocks within their fields. So trying to understand what your management units are and how you're moving the cattle through them. If that is changing a lot over the year, that can be reflected in the remote sensing data, but it's really important that those two things link together. So if you are dynamically changing things, we find a way to make sure that we're getting that linking into the data, so that we're not predicting for the wrong units when we're grouping things together in the biomass predictions. So there are some real questions there that we need to have a look at them daily. Must move stock daily. Okay, that's some interesting things to capture as well. Great.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Just even from the comments today, that some people really do need daily information because of the systems that they're operating under. So I suppose how much flexibility can be factored in is something we should consider.
There are some limitations at the moment as well with how frequently you will get the satellite data. So if you're just basing it on the observations, you'll be able to get about a week tempo is the most you can get guaranteed. But because the model has a predictive capacity, you can get a sort of a forecast for a few days that then gets updated by the next actual observation. So you could get a weekly thing with a weekly prediction that might then help you actually be able to tie it down a bit, on the understanding that if you put your stock in and take the grass out, the prediction won't reflect that. So it would give you kind of an idea of what might happen over the week. Yeah, I agree. No fence collars are indeed the real follow on here, and it's definitely somewhere that we'd be interested in looking later on after the project, seeing if there's more interest there.
And Ian, there's a comment from Sue querying how is manure management, application rates, timing, etc. To be incorporated, and what's also being used. So that's certainly things we want to know about in the survey, but also with the trial farms, that will be a really important part, won't it?
That's absolutely part of the second tier, where we're asking farmers to kind of give us that weekly information. Feeding that information back to us will allow us to incorporate that into the model. Now, in terms of how this thing gets then rolled out later, if it's a case of you just need to put in I could imagine a system where we've got the remote sensing that's doing one thing. It's kind of giving you that observation of how the leaf area is changing. But the more farmers are willing to kind of put into the app, say, well, I've just put on this much slurry, that can then be put in the nutrient input, could be used to parameterize the model and then bind everything together again. So that kind of feeding information back in, the more that you put in to tell us about what you're doing in terms of your management, the more accurately the model can be parameterized to make the best use of the data you're telling us and the information that's being picked up from the remote sensing. So this is actually a really key thing moving forwards, is how we get that data collected in a simple fashion. And this is one of the reasons why we're wanting to integrate with existing platforms where that data might already be getting recorded, things like HerdWatch or AgriNet or whatever, where you're putting your data in, you're saying, this is what I'm doing. That data can then feed into the model along with the remote sensing and kind of keep the whole thing in the right trajectory. Plan subscription.
Sorry, I was just thinking about weather and rainfall and things, and particularly in terms of drought periods. Obviously, will be because that's such a critical thing in terms of trying to focus on pasture-based systems going forward. Is if we carry on having huge problems with low rainfall, then pasture production goes through the out the window. But are you looking at taking real-time weather data?
So the model absolutely uses real-time weather data. That's part of what it does to kind of keep it on the right trajectory. So it's can take in model data. It's also capable of feeding in much more detailed weather from weather stations. But of course, the thing about weather stations is that's great if you've got one on your farm, but if you don't have one anywhere nearby, you're probably better to use like the UK model, the weather models to do that. We are looking at participating with other platforms. AgriNet's definitely on the cards. I think we've had some conversations with some other platforms as well, but we don't have them as project partners, but we will be looking at engaging with many of these different platforms, HerdWatch as well, as an example of the sort of platform we're looking to engage with.
And Ian, is it, we don't need to go into a huge amount of detail, but the way in which Innovate UK for this kind of project and funding works is that we've got time to obviously look at what we're developing and what the market need is and the best way for us to be able to get the product to market. So there's a question as well from Nick in terms of understanding what the costs might be. So this is an important part of what we're doing in this 2 years to see to explore all that, isn't it?
Exactly. The intention is to be producing a commercial service, and whether that is delivered as a bolt-on to existing services or something you sign up yourselves and get benefit from, we need to understand. The plan subscription cost is to be affordable. I can't tell you exactly what the numbers are, but there's no point us putting out something which just doesn't make sense economically. It has to be affordable. It has to be something you're willing to pick up. But we have to work as we're developing and listen to you about what that is. Hopefully an honest answer. Again, I'm not the most commercial person in the company, so we can have some more conversations about that as we're getting into the business planning side of things as well.
Thanks, Ian.
Seasonal variation on pre and post grazing biomass. Lots of work to calibrate this, 100%. It's a huge amount of variability to think about here. One of the advantages, though, of taking the modelled approach is because the model has it's based upon Bayesian assimilation in the background. So you have that model that understands that there's uncertainties in the prediction, and it's understanding that there is uncertainty in all the data that is being fed into it from the remote sensing, from the weather, and also in terms of like swards, all that sort of thing. So one of the advantages that does give you is that it means that if you have some noisy data and some observations are better than others, it can take that uncertainty into an account to say, well, this is where we are and there is an error budget on this. The tighter we can calibrate and nail down some of those parameters, the tighter the calibration can be. But yes, the amount of variation when you really get onto the ground, look across different soil types, different farm types, different agricultural systems, it will start to get very complicated to calibrate, and that's why we're doing a research project to do it, to try and get that resource in.
Brilliant. So Ian, I think we've had some really good comments that sort of come in. Unless anyone's got anything else they want to ask today, I'm happy to sort of just do a final. Stephen's come in with a big question. I don't know, Ian, if you've just seen that.
Yes, I have. How accurate is satellite monitoring of large biomass grassland? Good question. It is something that we are working at. So the basic idea is that leaf area index measurements are quite well calibrated because of the optical imagery we're using has some calibrations that are quite good. I can't tell you the precise values for biomass of grasslands, but certainly in terms of amount of leaf area index, that has been well calibrated with good correlations. The radar data as well, which is part of what we're measuring, is capable of measuring the biomass. We've had some very strong correlations in some places. I mean, getting within plus minus 10% biomass for some fields. And then in other places, we've been getting very weak correlations. And that is something that just taking the data alone leaves you in a position where you get some fields with good correlation, some fields with bad correlation. You can't really understand why that is. The advantage to this project is taking that model here and using the data the satellite imagery to update the model means that we've got something that of itself has got an understanding of what's going on. And the satellite imagery is course correcting the model rather than just looking for a simple relationship between what's happening in the field and what's happening in the imagery. So that's the background. In terms of how accurate it is, the thing to focus on is how accurate the model predictions are of biomass against what you see on the ground. Edinburgh University have demonstrated some very good correlations at broad scale, but they haven't had the data yet to really do some detailed calibration on a per farm basis, and that's what we really need to get into here. We have worked with researchers in the USA. Edinburgh do that as well. They've got a wide network. There's certainly groups that are looking at this in JPL, for example, that we've spoken to. So we are tied into quite a broad network of people here. And as I say, remote environment systems does work in Canada and the USA as well. So we are tied into to quite big networks. Without being any more specific about who you're thinking of, I can't be any more detailed than that, I'm afraid.
And Ian, you've already offered to, for us to perhaps organise a much more scientific focused workshop webinar for people who are really interested in getting the detail behind what we're developing. And I suppose it's also, there's lots of information that we put together in the original funding bid that of course is part and parcel of all the work that you've been doing at Environment Systems and also the team at the University of Edinburgh. So we could certainly put out some more briefing materials if that's helpful. I think we'd just like to, if you're particularly interested, and perhaps Stephen, you are, and others, in having more of the background behind this, it'd be great to know the sorts of things that you want, and then we can put out some general briefing materials. And we're meeting up this afternoon as the project team anyway, so we'll also look at factoring in some other sessions that are much more around the data and the science behind all of this, which is certainly not my area of expertise.
And Ben, we have looked at what Rumi have been doing. They take a approach of using the radar remote sensing and optical remote sensing, I believe. We found results that just from our radar, the data alone, that are in the same ballpark as Rumi. I don't know the details about how they're achieving it. But we do think that the real advantage of coming at this from the modeling approach is it gives you not just a black box of machine learning or whatever to correlate against your observations. You've actually got a procedural model, a process-based model that knows, as I put sunlight in and nutrients in, I should get an amount of grass growth that comes out based upon, you know, some physical calibratable parameters. And that gives you a much better idea of being able to track and understand why your grass is going from here to there. And if you see something that doesn't make sense, you can then go, well, why doesn't that make sense? Not just the model says, the black box says it's gone up for no reason. Actually, oh, this parameter has gone up. Let's go and look at that. What's happened on the farm? Oh, there's a different species mix. We need to recalibrate a parameter for a species mix or what have you. So we do think there's a real strength to coming at it from this kind of science modeling perspective rather than just a machine learning perspective. But I think broadly the data we're feeding in is very similar to what Rumi are leveraging. But again, I don't know the exact details of what they're up to.
Okay, cool. Well, in terms of next steps then, I think we can just sort of conclude. I've had this slide up a very long time. Apologies. So obviously there's lots of ways, as Ian has outlined, of getting involved and being part of the Pastoral project. And it's just, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today for this first workshop to kick off what we're trying to do. It's going to be, I think, a really exciting year next year in terms of both more workshops, but actually then working with a cohort of farmers that want to be with us on that journey, opening up their farms, getting involved, being supported by the team to capture the data and do the validation and the calibration. So we're creating a tool that works for farmers, works for pasture performance, and helps you with on-farm decision making. So we're really excited about the level of interest we've already had in Pastoral. Really grateful for your time today. Anna's just popped into the chat a quick survey just for you now before everyone logs off and says ta-ra. If you do want to sign up and know more, thanks to everyone who's completed the survey already that got circulated with the joining instructions for today's webinar. We'll recirculate that later because it would be great if you could just spare a few minutes just to complete that initial survey and let us know if you're interested in being involved in the next stage, and we'll be in touch about that. And in the new year, moving forward, bringing the whole team together with farmers, then look at the next phase of how we take Pastoral forward. So we'll be looking at having some more workshops and sessions in February, conscious of the farming calendar, so keen to do a lot of activity before lambing and calving happens, and then silaging and haymaking and everything else. So we'll be factoring that in. So we'll be in touch in the new year with a bit of a timeline of what's happening. And I really hope that some of you today, I can certainly get a sense that there's a lot of interest in what Ian's been talking about the potential capabilities of Pastoral, and just really let us know. It'd be ideal to have some chats, won't it, one-to-one, Ian, as well, with people.
100%.
Just the early stage. So if you want to talk away, and there's so much expertise in this virtual room, that would be absolutely fantastic. And we'll keep you all updated as well as the project's progressing. And for those farms that want to be more actively involved with the data collection, hopefully we'll get out and about on farm and you can see some of the testing and the validation going on as well as we progress for the next, not quite 24 months, but yeah, as we go.
And just to add on to that as well, we will have our project officer in post from the start of January. They'll be getting engaged as well with kind of day-to-day collection of data from you, or also answering any questions, just being a point of contact. They're 100% on the project and will be, you know, hopefully a really good resource for everybody to get to know and find out more about with. So I look forward to introducing them soon.
Brilliant. Well, unless there's any last minute comments in the chat, I'd just like to thank everyone again for joining us. Anna for organising today's webinar, Kate and Ian and Colleen for facilitating, I can't even say it, that's why I don't facilitating the discussion. There's so much that we can talk about, so we will stay in touch and hopefully see you all again at the next meeting for Pastoral. So thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.